Well, my name is Dr. Wayne Sedlak, and this is Vision Viewpoint. With me is Don Pridemore. Don, thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Don, you are running for the 13th State Senate seat in the state of Wisconsin. Folks, note that again, the area for the 13th district. What are we talking about?
Well, it actually starts out in Hartford and goes west all the way out to the edge of Dane County. It includes Beaver Dam.
Okay.
And then to the north, we're up into Elmira area. And then to the south, Oconomowoc.
Yep.
But in between, there's a lot of farmland and a lot of smaller cities. Ashippun, Rubicon, Neosho.
Right.
All those areas. And it's a very conservative district.
A lot of farmers.
A lot of farmers.
There are, now generally speaking, and I know this already, but I want people to hear, you stand for quite a few things that aren't as popular elsewhere, but are still popular here.
Mm-hmm.
Name a few.
Well, the Constitution, I back the badge. Very Second Amendment oriented.
You stand for our local police.
Definitely.
Yeah, the Second Amendment, of course, you're in the state of Wisconsin, so.
That's right.
That's right.
And I plan on introducing constitutional carry when I get into office.
Good. Don, there's several areas that you're concerned about. One of them is election fraud. Now, we're all shocked by what occurred in Wisconsin. I believe our vote was stolen. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was, in fact, we were defrauded. It wasn't just stolen, it was defrauded.
Yes.
Explain to me, as a state senator, now remember, folks, the primary is on the 16th. So we have to get this man in office before he can do what he's saying. And what he's saying is exceptionally important in light of the fraud that we faced. You identified as many as 20 areas in state practice and law concerning, no, we can't go into all of that concerning concerning election fraud. Name a few areas of your expertise.
Well, first of all, these mailboxes that were set out to collect ballots have to go. That's already a violation of state law.
That's right.
The Election Commission allowed it, and leadership in the Republican Party ignored it. Yes, did nothing during that whole period.
Right.
And when there's no chain of control over ballots, it's rife for fraud.
Right.
So anybody can stuff something in one of those mailboxes. They can make up ballots and put them in envelopes and stick them in there, and who knows where they came from.
Yeah.
And with the indefinitely confinement box, you can check. You don't even need to put an ID in with your ballot. So what I propose to do in cases like that, if for some reason we can't get rid of those functions, every ballot that comes in from a mailbox or from any person indefinitely confined, even same-day registration voters, those ballots would automatically be considered provisional, meaning that they will not be opened and run through the voting machine, until all the information within those envelopes are confirmed. That might take a little more time, but it certainly discourages people from using the process if they know that the ballot is going to sit there and wait until it gets counted. And if we have to put more resources into that function, COVID has been with us now. Who knows how long it's going to be a big issue in the future.
So we better restart and think about the future.
Exactly. So those are the major issues. What I want to do, because have an electronics engineering background,
Right.
I proposed when I was in the assembly to write a specification for the next voting machine. And what I would put in a voting machine is, number one, I'm going to put a time function in the machine that cannot be altered externally. There would be no flash drive ports, no connections to the internet.
No way to manipulate it.
Yes, no way to manipulate it externally.
Right.
Plus, I would put a Faraday cage around all the electronics, which shields it from external
Right.
exposure to RF energy. So we got a date stamp. As you know, a lot of these ballots came in from the past election in the midnight hour, or after the midnight hour.
3 a.m.
Yes. Well, that
All
can't,
of a sudden,
that
an
can't be
avalanche
allowed.
of votes.
So if the ballot is time stamped, you can actually see that happening. And if you give the voter a receipt come out of the machine in case of a recount, and he saves that for a possible recount on a very close race, then there's proof that if you get that receipt, you look at it, you make sure that every candidate that you voted for is represented on that receipt. So if the machine malfunctioned or something, or if the machine using Dominion type software
Right.
decides to flip a few votes, well, you have proof that not only that you voted, but who you voted for.
It's still private to you, but you can show it if you need to.
That's correct. So
So there's accountability both ways. There's accountability from the people who've actually voted. They know how they vote, and they have a proof there too.
that's correct.
And then there's protection inside the software hardware itself.
That's right. That's right.
So, Don, we've just discussed a lot of this. What do you see that went really wrong? Obviously, the ballots as you described them, but the lack of leadership. You said there's lack of chain of command. There was no accountability, complacency of the Republicans. I see that as a huge problem.
Right. And when you look at the Georgia situation, now here's a situation where they drugged about 4 what they called suitcases of ballots that were hidden under a table after all the Republican observers were chased out. And those ballots were put in the machine repeatedly, not just once, but repeatedly until they had enough of a vote to sway the election.
Right.
And that's how those 2 Senate candidates won.
Right.
And the Republicans did nothing in between the election and the Senate elections. They did nothing to improve or safeguard the process of those ballots. So why would you think anything is going to change?
So what would you have wanted? I know the answer to this, but what could they have done in this state? I know there was just complacency, and that's always bad. That's all indifference will always get you corruption and fraud.
One thing I did when I was in the assembly is I proposed a certain distance from observing to actual ballot count. And I wanted the observers to be able to sit at the same table as the people that are going through either registration
Right.
or as people go through the line. There's typically 3 or 4 different stations you go to anytime you go to vote. So I always vote on election day myself. I don't trust
Me too.
my
That's
ballot
right.
to the post
Right.
office,
Right.
and I want to make sure that that little ding shows up on the voting machine when I stick my ballot in.
Right.
So, but that's my personal preference. I realize that some people can't do.
Well, there's a place for absentee ballots,
Yeah, there's a place for
but
it.
there's so much fraud surrounding them. It
Right.
got out of hand because there's no accountability. There's no real accountability, and there's no sanctions. What kind of sanctions are involved?
Well, here's the other part of the problem. All my bills will have a penalty if an election official, an unelected bureaucrat that's in charge of our election system, if they are guilty of breaking the law, they personally will be subject to Class I felonies and be subject to a severe penalty in terms of a fine. So if you don't perform to the law, then you go to jail. You pay a fine. And not only that, but another part of my bill will take into account that if you create voter fraud in Milwaukee, first of all, they don't investigate voter fraud. Enforcement mechanism does not exist.
Right.
In our police departments.
Right.
So I would make sure that there are enough police resources that know what election laws are and can enforce them if called upon. Secondly, if you file a complaint in Milwaukee, for instance, you have a liberal district attorney, you have a liberal common counsel, and a judge. So how are you going to get a fair trial?
Well, I've already heard that to be the case. There were those that did put in complaints, that put in affidavits.
Right.
I interviewed a man who did that very thing. It went nowhere.
Right. Well, what I propose on doing is dividing Wisconsin up into 4 separate sections. So we have regional courts set up, not courts, but regional districts, so that when you submit a a claim against anybody or file a lawsuit, it wouldn't automatically go to a Milwaukee district attorney or circuit court. It could go to any court within that region on a random basis.
Who chooses?
Well, it's random.
Okay, so they're just going to pull it out of the hat.
Right.
They won't be able to manipulate it as well.
Right. So if you file a lawsuit in Milwaukee, it could very well end up in Sheboygan, Washington County, Waukesha County. All those areas then could receive that challenge, and then those resources then would be dedicated to adjudicating the file of the lawsuit.
Are your opponents in this, are they bringing up election fraud at all? Do you hear them?
I have not heard a word.
Neither have I.
I've heard claims, but I haven't seen any legislation.
I've heard, we call that hearsay. I haven't heard anything
Right.
from your rivals, if I can put it that way, those that are opposed to you and running. I haven't heard a thing about it.
Well, here's what I've heard so far. So far, I've heard that the Republicans are going to make a deal with the governor in the budget. That if he wants a budget passed, he has to also pass election law reform, and they'll pick, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 different issues, maybe 4, that they'll try to make a deal with the governor so he doesn't veto it. But what happened? Who gets the last kick at the cat? The governor.
Right.
So he could promise anything in the world to the Republican side, the conservative side, yet line item those very
That's exactly right.
vetoes. That's why when I introduce this, I'm going to introduce it as a joint resolution.
Oh.
That will bypass the governor
Bypass
completely.
the governor entirely.
Yes.
That's right. So we should explain a line item veto. The governor, let's say they pass this large package, and the governor gives a verbal assent to but as soon as it arrives on his desk, line item veto means he can just strike out the provisions that he doesn't like and then sign the bill, and they can't do anything about it.
That's correct. That's correct.
Not that he would, of course. Not this governor. Being sarcastic, I'm sure all of you know. Other areas of concern or needed change when it comes to election fraud, because it's a massive subject.
The people are. I mean, I've heard people say, "What point do I have to go vote when I can't trust the system?"
Right.
So all of this is intended to build back the trust that we have in our election system. Without trust, people are going to stay home and not even bother to vote.
Right.
And that's the exact wrong attitude we want. We want as many people to vote honestly and truthfully as we can get to the polls, but we don't want the fraud part. We want to build confidence, eliminate fraud.
So we want all of you to be able to go and vote without worrying about fraud. But we're going to need a voice, obviously, in Madison to get that done. So February 16th is the primary. And Don, on the 16th, you've got 2 other opponents.
2 other opponents?
And they're not saying anything about this. At least
No.
I have not heard it.
No.
So folks, there's your opportunity. Now's the time to speak out and to act. February 16th. So be prepared for the primary, GOP primary. Don, I certainly pray that, and certainly wish you well, that you'll get through and do well and go on to the major election. By the way, folks, the primary is the beginning. Then you have what, April?
Yes. April 6th.
April 6th. So
1 Democrat.
1 Democrat. So there's your opportunity. The 13th state Senate seat, Don Pridemore, I believe is one that you should certainly consider and vote for. And again, some of the areas we're talking about, we mentioned some of the cities. Hartford, obviously. Watertown, Elmira.
Watertown is where my office is right now.
Okay.
And it's at that's really the central location within the district. But I also want people to know that I'm fighting the establishment. The establishment in the party does not want me there because I'm a fighter. I don't.
Well, you proved that when you were there before.
I don't necessarily do everything leadership wants me to do.
Right.
So I'm more independent. And if that's the kind of person they want in office to represent them and not special interests, I don't take money from anybody.
Right.
Other than individual citizens.
Right.
That believe in what I believe in.
So you've proven that in the past. when you were in office.
Mhm.
So again, you have your opportunity. Now's the opportunity. Again, Don, we certainly wish you well and pray that that is accomplished.
Thank you.
God bless you, sir.
Thank you.